Welcome into the inaugural episode of Christ in a Culture War. I'm Jesse Williams. I'm your host. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll probably see it on the Dads in Timeout channel. This is nothing about sports. So if you're here for the sports, I encourage you to stay, but we will not be talking about sports. This is a totally different concept. It started off with a blog a couple years ago. I think I was in Africa when I started, and I wanted to find Christ in a culture war. What I mean by that is Christ is not in a culture war, but the culture is at war with Christ. If you don't know who I'm talking about Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who was 100% man, 100% God from the Holy Scriptures, the Christ described in the Bible. The reason I say a culture war is, so I have to start off by saying that normally I don't like the words culture and society, because people generalize them into saying, well, society defines this, society defines that. And I think people get confused into thinking that everybody across the world believes the same things. And that is absolutely not the case. If you've ever been to the Middle East, if you've ever been to Africa, some of you may have been to Asian countries, China, Japan, Indonesia. They do things differently. And so on that token, people do not always look at things the same way. And what I mean by the culture war is that we live in a society, and this is probably going to be a big topic of this podcast, is that most people think that all belief systems are inherently the same. So what you have today is you have a thing called cultural relativism, or relative morality. So what they mean by that is that what is right and wrong for me may not be right and wrong for somebody else. And there might be some different examples of that, to where culturally we look at different things and we do things a little differently. But that doesn't change the fact that inherently there are things that every person, regardless of their belief system, can look at and say are wrong. For example, me having a 13-year-old girlfriend at 37, I would hope that we could universally agree is bad. Me walking into your house stealing something is not wrong just from a perspective, because here is where relativism falls on its face. If you say that all morals are relative, then you start playing a dangerous game with language, because you might say, well, that's only bad from my perspective or your perspective, right? But if I took a baseball bat and knocked out your headlights, you would be upset. At least I would hope you would be, because you probably spent money on that vehicle. Now you have to spend money to fix it, or you have to sue me and take me to court. But if you don't believe in moral absolutes, then when we go to court and you tell the judge that I was wrong for hitting your car with a baseball bat and busting your taillights, then how can you stand on that moral high ground and tell me what was wrong if you don't believe that there are right and wrong, right? That's just an example. Because Hitler's a great example. Or any person that ever had dreams of conquest or world domination, or just even the United States taking over the territory that we now know as America, right? So they might have thought, well, we got to get our people in here and start this country for freedoms for certain groups of people. And the Native Americans would have a different view on that. And we're not going to get into the geopolitical aspects of land conquering and all that. So a lot of times people will say that different belief systems are all true. They're like, hey, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, Taoism, even atheism to an extent, we're basically all believe in the same things. But here's the problem with that statement, is there are things in each of these belief systems that contradict each other. Now, whether they're true or not, that's a different discussion. That's where, and we're going to talk about faith here, and actually we're going to jump into that right now, where people have this belief that faith is just blindly believing something. Well, if you blindly believe something, how do you know it's true? It's just a guessing game at that point. Like, if I jump into a body of water, I believe that I'm going to sink to the bottom if I don't swim or tread water. Well, how do I know that? Is that blind faith? Absolutely not. Number one, I have seen other people jump into the water and either sink or swim. I've never seen anybody jump into the water and just float without a flotation device, of course. So it becomes an interesting thing when people just believe that a group of people, namely Christians, just believe in something. And some people do. Some people believe something because mom and dad told them, or they were taught it at church. And then some people believe stuff because a science teacher told them. And so the Bible defines faith as the evidence of things not seen. So you believe in the wind. You've never seen the wind. If you have, let me know. That's incredible. But you know the wind's there. Why? You have evidence for the wind, right? You have evidence that the wind blows because you can feel the wind. You can see trees blowing. And somebody a long time ago was like, that's wind. And you're like, okay, I take your word for it. But if nobody had ever seen the effects of wind, you would be like, I don't believe it. Kind of like we have faith that the sun has rays and UV rays and all that stuff and radiation, because we've done scientific experiments, but you can't prove anything. So if you go to court and somebody, because people are always like, I need you to prove to me that God exists, or I need you to prove to me that this is true. Well, nobody gets convicted or acquitted in court based on proof. It's based on evidence. They gather the evidence. Hey, this guy saw this guy do this. So I'll give you an example. I love giving examples. So let's say that I walk into a house, and this is a narrative. So like, we'll give a different example since so it's not me. So let's say John Stone walks into a house, and he goes into the house, and then he comes out of the house, and he's got a knife, and he's covered in blood. His fingerprints are all on the scene, and somebody saw him walk in the house, but nobody actually saw him murder anybody. The police show up, they put the yellow tape up, they find his fingerprints, his DNA, they do all their little forensic science stuff. The evidence points to that this guy probably killed that guy. Now, is it possible that John Stone was friends with the guy, walked into the house, the guy was already murdered, he touches the knife because he's like, oh my gosh, he freaks out, he has his DNA there, the blood is now on his hands, he checked the pulse and touched the neck? That's absolutely possible. It's not probable, but it is a possibility. But the courts, if he goes to trial, will look at the evidence and say, hey, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people saw this guy with the murder weapon at the scene at the time of the crime, has no alibi to other places where he's been. They're going to probably rightfully ascertain that he's the murderer. He gets convicted based on evidence by a jury of his peers, whether or not we have proof. Because then people are like, what if there's video evidence? Well, how do we know the video evidence hasn't been doctored? Now, once again, it's most likely, based on the evidence, that it probably wasn't doctored. We have technological ways to prove that. We can ascertain to a certain point that this guy probably murdered that guy. Then you come into things with motive, like, hey, we saw John Stone and we'll call the suspect Robbie Smith. So Robbie Smith and John Stone had been seen in an argument. They overheard, and Robbie Stone had allegedly slept with John Stone's wife. So now we have motive. Doesn't prove anything. So nobody's like, oh, we proved that he killed that guy. Well, no, you didn't prove anything. But based on the evidence, you can ascertain that that murder was probably committed by that guy, just like we do with the existence of a creator, right? So if you've ever seen a pair of shoes, you would assume that somebody somewhere in a factory made those shoes. It's not like, poof, there were shoes. Okay, so you then see a book, and there's words in the book. Well, you would assume that somebody had those thoughts and put that down. Whether or not that person wrote it down or typed it out, those words didn't just appear out of thin air. And so when it comes to relativism, and when people start saying, because we can get into the whole scientific whether or not the universe is eternal, which I don't think it is, because if the universe was eternal, we would never get to today, because you would have to keep going back a day to get, so like we have years, right? Because at some point people were like, hey, maybe we should start keeping track of years and days and months and all that based on our understanding of time. You then look at these things and you're like, okay, like if the world started in 6,000 BC, 4,000 BC, wherever you believe, if it's millions of years old, billions of years old, it's really inconsequential you would be like, oh, no, like, but the universe went backwards eternally, right? So you'd be like, okay, well, it's today. And it's like, well, actually, if the universe is eternal, you would keep having to go back a day. So you would never get to today. So me personally, now mind you, I can't prove to you that the universe is not eternal. I wasn't there. Nobody was. See, a lot of times people claim to be like, science says this, science says that, even though scientists say things based on, and I think the scientific method is a really good method. But you can't use the scientific method to date how old the Earth is, because you can't go back into time. And we don't know anybody that was alive in 2000 BC to say, hey, look, this is how old it is. We take it on faith. So there's going to be a lot of different episodes of this podcast, if that's what you want to call it. I could go on for an hour, but I think that most people have short attention spans, so we'll keep these to like 10, 15, 20-minute videos. So like Hinduism, right? And this isn't against anyone that believes in any systems. This is just basic tenets of each belief system. Whether you believe them or not, that's up to you. So Hinduism is hard to describe because there's lots of different branches of Hinduism, and that name actually came from the British in the 1800s. They started calling people Hindus. It's a religion that originates from India. Hindus believe in what they call the Brahman and karma and reincarnation. So karma is like, hey, based on all these good things, bad things happen, or good things happen to you, and when you die and you haven't achieved enough karma, then you are reincarnated into, your soul is reincarnated into a different body, and then once your karma is met, I guess reaches a certain level, then you become one with the Brahman. All right, so out of Hinduism came Buddhism. Well, Siddhartha Gautama looked around and he saw a lot of suffering, and he was a rich prince, and he was like, wait a minute, why is that guy suffering? Why is this guy poor? I think he saw like a dead body, and he's coming into conflict with all the multiple gods and the teachings of Hinduism, so he started what became Buddhism, which basically is opposite, where there is no God force, and it's about enlightenment and becoming, basically, at the end of your life, you cease to exist, right? And they claim that pain is an illusion. I don't hold to that. They have the right to believe that. But you can see where it differs from Hinduism, where like there are gods and everything. Like Buddhism is actually, if you really look at it, like it's where George Lucas got Star Wars from. That's where you get like the Force and the energy and the Jedi and all that, like, and he mixed it with the Roman Empire. Like, it's pretty easy to see. I mean, and then you added some Nazi elements of the Stormtrooper and all that. So then you have Judaism, which Christianity, in most people's eyes that are Christians, is just an extension of it, that believes that the Christians and the Jews, minus like one or two books, keep the same Old Testament. And they believe that God created the earth and that there's a Messiah coming, but they do not believe that Christ is that Messiah. Then the Christians came along, and they were Jews, 100% Jewish, and Yeshua, or Jesus Christ, came, and they were like, that's the Son of God. They said he resurrected from the dead and that he's coming back. And then Muslims came along in the 600s with Muhammad, and he was like, well, they're the people of the book, but Jesus was really just a good prophet, and Muhammad is a singular God, where the Christians have the triune Trinity God, which is three persons in one being, and they believe that the Messiah has already come and that he's returning. My point of outline, and then atheists, you have many different kind of atheists. I don't want to put them in a box and say that they all believe the same thing. Some will say they just lack a belief. Some will say they believe there is no God. You have agnostics who are like, hey, I don't know, which is my favorite people to talk to, because they're more open-minded, which everyone should be open-minded. Even if you like believe in something, you should be able to listen to somebody else, because I got to a point in my life where, I think it was like 2011, 2012, where I was like, wait a minute, why do I believe all this Jesus stuff, right? When I was 18, I didn't have any evidence. It was just like, yeah, my mom and dad told me about this, and I went to Sunday school, and Jesus is the way, which is great. But when people started being like, well, like the light from the stars, and they showed Zeitgeist and all the other mythologies, and I started being like, hey, wait a minute, let me look into this. And I did my research, and I came out with mostly the same conclusions. My point is that Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity and Islam all have things within them that contradict each other. So I think when we have these discussions, it would be like saying that I say I'm a human, this guy says that I'm a dog, and this other guy says, no, actually he's an asteroid. Now, whatever you identify as is one thing, but if we're looking at actual facts based on the evidence points to that I'm a human being. So one of us has to be wrong, right? And so that's the big point of this podcast, because I talk to a lot of kids from this new generation, and when I say that, I want to be clear. The people in the generation before me thought we were dumb when we were growing up, or that we were, this terrible generation, and then it kind of trickles down. So I don't want it to come off as I'm saying there's something wrong with this generation, because it's just different. There's great things about this generation. Technology, I mean, this guy taught me how to access my phone when my power button was messed up. I didn't know I could just tap my phone twice and my screen would come on, and I could do my little code on the phone and use my phone. Learned that from a 16-year-old at work. It was great. But what's being taught in schools today is just a way of thinking that I do not think is conducive to reality. And what I mean by that is, I had a roommate, I'm not going to throw his name out there because I love the guy, but he was always talking about perspective. Well, this is just from your perspective, that's from my perspective. And while perspective is important, we have to at some point, because what psychology does is it changes the meaning of words, right? So we start taking ideas and saying, well, there can't be any absolute truth. Now, my absolute truth could be 100% wrong. If I found out that was the case, I wouldn't believe what I believe, because as much as I like what I believe, and there's certain things that trouble me about what I believe, if it's false, why would I believe in it? But if everything is just the same, and then we're just ignoring the contradictions within there. If I say that I work at Walmart and somebody says, no, you work at Pilgrims, which is a chicken plant, I either, now you could be like, you work at both. Well, yeah, then those would both be true, but I don't work at Pilgrims, I work at Walmart. So one of us is right, one of us is wrong. So when I have discussions with people, it's not, a lot of the time we don't really even get to what I believe in, because we have to get to the method of how we talk about what we believe in. Because a lot of people haven't done their research. They're like, oh, well, all these people are saying the same exact things. It's easy to say that in America, but if you went to Saudi Arabia and told a Muslim in Saudi Arabia that he believed the same thing as a Buddhist, he would vehemently disagree with you, because he takes his worldview seriously. And that's my biggest thing, is I think that we should take our worldview seriously enough to have open conversations to where, like, hey, I believe this, you believe that. Not that we have to fight about our disagreements or our differences, but that we have to be able to be honest about what we believe in. And so a lot of times we don't even make it to the evidence, because people are so wrapped up in not wanting to say that someone's wrong. And it's not about saying that you're wrong. It's like, what does the evidence point to? Does the evidence point to a creator? Okay, I believe it does. So that, for me, wipes out atheism, agnosticism, and a lot of scientific thought, where it's like the universe is eternal. I just don't subscribe to that. I don't think the evidence points to there. Okay, so now that we have a creator, what are the qualities of this creator? So if you look at Scripture, what does the Bible describe God as? Well, the Bible says, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Right? So that's John 1. So when people say Jesus never claimed to be God, and I know those are John's words, they're like, never in the Bible does it say that Jesus claimed to be God. Another pet peeve I have is people don't read things in context. If you read the Bible in the context that it was written in, so for example, Moses, when he's going to the Israelites, God says, hey, I want you to go tell the Israelites that I sent you, and I want you to go tell the Pharaoh to let my people go. Okay. Moses asks a question. When the people ask me who sent you, who do I say you are? He's basically asking God what his name was, and God says, I am sent you. Fast forward to John 5. I think it's like 56 or something. It's near the end of the chapter. No, John 8. Excuse me, John 8. Like 50 something. I think it's 56. Anyways, he's having a discussion with the Pharisees. Very long, because obviously we're in the 56th verse, or 53rd or 54th verse. One of those two. I'm shooting on my phone, so I can't access the Bible on my phone while I'm shooting it off my camera, right? They're talking about Abraham, and Jesus says, well, Abraham saw the coming of my day, and he rejoiced. And they're like, you're not even 50 years old. How do you know Abraham? And he says, before Abraham was, I am. So in that context, they knew what he was saying. When he said, I am, he was claiming the name of God. He said many things like, I and the Father are one. No one comes to the Father but through me. He says at his trial in front of the Sanhedrin, maybe it was in front of Herod. I always get that confused, but you can look it up. I think it's in Mark and Matthew and Luke. He says that you will see the Son of Man descending on the clouds of heaven, seated at the right hand of power. So the Jews knew what he was referring to. That was in Daniel. See, this is where a lot of liberal scholars and atheist scholars want to say that they had to have written the Old Testament after the fact, because there's too many prophetic things, like Jesus predicting the destruction of the temple. The problem is we have the Dead Sea Scrolls that date Isaiah and Daniel and books like that to before the time of Christ. So when Jesus says, I'm the Son of Man, they knew exactly what that meant, because that's what Daniel referred to Christ as prophetically in his book, and or whoever wrote Daniel. Then you have Christ saying, I am. You have Christ saying that he has the power to forgive sins. He refers to himself as the Son of Man consistently. The Jews in that context knew what he was saying. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't like, because after he says, before Abraham was, I am, the next verse says they picked up stones to kill him. Right? So we cannot, in good faith, say that all these belief systems say the same thing. We have to get that out of the way now before we can go any further, because then we can never even get to which one is true or not. Because if you don't believe in absolute truth, or you don't think that truth is objective, the conversation kind of has to end there, because now we're going to argue all day about whether there is absolute truth, whether truth is objective, and we can't even get to whether this one's right, this one's wrong, because you claim not to believe in right and wrong. So that's a problem if we're going to have these discussions, right? And so Christ in a culture war, because a culture is all about not accepting intolerance, but then you're being intolerant toward intolerance, so you're still intolerant. Everyone's intolerant. Maybe not in a violent way or even a bad way. But if you say that Jesus is not the only way to God, then you're saying that I'm wrong for saying that. Now you're being intolerant of my view. And if I say that Jesus was not just a prophet, that he was God in the flesh, and he is the second person of the Trinity, I am now disagreeing with Muslims and Jews and Hindus and Buddhists and everyone who doesn't even think Jesus agreed. So as long as we can start off by saying that we don't all believe the same thing, then we can have an honest discussion and bring in evidences for faith, evidences for Christ, evidences for the consistency of the New Testament. But that's the whole point of this podcast. And I'm not pointing fingers. I mean, you have the right to believe whatever you believe in. And remember, if I'm speaking about what the Bible says, it's not me saying it. I just believe it. Now, you can be mad at me for believing it, but I didn't write any of the books in the Bible, Old or New Testament. I didn't write any of the Gnostic Gospels. I didn't write the Quran. I didn't write the Vedas of Hinduism. I didn't write the Bhagavad Gita. However you say that, I always butcher that. But any of the Buddhist writings, I didn't write any of it. I'm just taking what I read, taking historical data, archaeological finds, and evidences in nature to come to conclusions about what I believe in. So we get to heaven and hell, people are like, you're telling me I'm going to hell. It's like, I'm not telling you anything. I'm telling you what the Bible says because you asked me, right? It doesn't mean I'm telling you you're going to hell. If Christianity is wrong, then no, you're probably not. And if hell doesn't exist, why does it matter anyways? Why does it matter what I believe? I'm not standing on a street corner telling people, you're going to hell. I put the message out, and you have the right to either respond or ignore it. Now, I want to be clear that throughout all this, we should live in peace and harmony with each other. So if I've been overseas. I've had the best conversations ever with Muslims who don't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. That's fine. I pray for them. I think they're wrong, but we can still coexist. It's when people start saying you don't have the right to believe that. I would never tell a person in the world they don't have the right to believe something. That's totalitarianism. Like, the whole country was supposedly founded on getting away from that. So you have the right to be a Buddhist. You have the right to be a Hindu. And there are certain things in those belief systems that we can admire, like Muslims praying 5 times a day. Like the dedication, the meditation, even though I don't think meditation is a good thing because I don't think you should empty your mind. Like the Bible says in Romans to be transformed by the renewal of your mind. It doesn't mean to empty your mind. So we're going to be talking about a lot of things going on. A lot of these ideologies that guys like Sam Smith and Richard Dawkins perpetrate that I just think are false. Because if you tell me Christianity is wrong, I have way more respect for that viewpoint. And I'll always have respect for you as a human being, but I have way more respect for that view than the view that says that we believe the same thing. Because then I think we're just being intellectually dishonest, and I don't think that's fair to you. I don't think that's fair to me. Because I would never tell you what you believe. If you think Christ isn't the Messiah, we can start there. And I can tell you why I think he is, was, and forever will be. But if you're just like, I believe the same thing you believe, and no, you don't. And I wouldn't want to tell you that you believe the same thing as me because I don't want to hurt your feelings. Now, if you don't want to have the conversation at all, turn this off. We don't have to have that conversation. But the conversation needs to be had if you're willing to listen. Because this is just me wanting to do a podcast and explaining to people that once we start off with moral relativism and relative truth, those ideas fall flat on their face. And if you believe that, then you can believe that. And that's your right to believe that, but then don't have a... So you can't say that truth is relative and then tell me I'm wrong. And I can't do the same thing to you. It's like you could say, I believe that you're objectively wrong. I'd be like, hey man, I respect that. But why do you think I'm wrong? And if you have a great argument, we can kick back and have a conversation, and we can agree to go our separate ways, or, work together, be friends or whatever. Because we can leave that conversation knowing we were honest with each other and not saying, oh, I just don't want to hurt your feelings. And that's why a lot of people don't have these conversations. They wish we lived in a world where all these paths lead to God, but they're not all the same gods. Because if they were, God's schizophrenic. And then if God... Because here's the problem with believing that all belief systems are the same. If that's true, then God's a liar. Because he's telling you this and you that and you this and you this and you that, and confusing the whole entire world over millenniums. Why would you want to believe in a God like that? Jesus was like, I am the only way to the Father. It's a hard teaching. It really is. But if that's true, we should believe it. If it's not, we shouldn't. Paul said if Christ was not crucified, or he said if he's not resurrected. Basically, he's saying that if Christ did not live, and Christ did not die on the cross, and Christ did not resurrect, and Christ is not God in the flesh, then we should not believe it. Because there's only 2 options for Jesus. Not he's a moral teacher, or he's a prophet, and this. No, he claimed to be God. The Jews knew he claimed to be God, and they wanted to kill him for it. But they had to have the Romans do it because it happened during Passover, right? So they legally could not carry out the execution, because if they had, they would have stoned him. They would not have crucified him. That was a Roman form of execution. But the Jews wanted him dead because he was committing, in their eyes, blasphemy. They didn't be like, well, us and these offshoot followers of Jesus, we all believe the same thing. No, they knew they didn't. And I respect them. They were wrong. I respect that belief that, hey, like, they objectively believed that Jesus was not the coming of the Messiah. So that was a lot. I said I was going to keep this between 15 and 20 minutes. It's been 30 minutes. So this is the first episode. We're going to go over things like on some episodes, I'm just going to outline the story of the Bible. And then we're going to outline how we got the Gospels and why I believe they were written early. We're going to talk about things like, well, we'll talk about some things. I don't know how often I'll do this, but this is this is the first episode of Christ in a Culture War from your host, Jesse Williams. Feel free to share this video, watch it, scream at me in the comments. Please keep it clean, because we should just respect each other, right? We don't want this to become Twitter. Twitter's become a horrible place. That's why I'm only there for my sports podcast, and I'm sure I'll share this there. So I hope you'll have a blessed day. I hope that everyone is doing well, and God bless, and I hope to have actual conversations with you. So be blessed and have a great day.